one of the best examples I've ever heard about this is from Ben Hardy. He gave a great example of Michael Jordan in the 80s. And he says all people think about are the 6 titles that he won, and he's done all these things, and he's Michael Jordan. And I'm an avid Jordan fan. But he reminded, before Phil Jackson came to the Chicago Bulls, the famed coach. Jordan was getting his ass kicked by the Pistons, and he couldn't win. And people forget at the time that in the league, he wasn't beloved Jordan yet. People said he couldn't win. He'll never be Magic. He'll never be Larry. Scoring titles don't win championships. Like, he was heavily criticized, and people said he couldn't win. He was a prime example of who's not house.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
So you bring in somebody who's arguably the greatest athlete who's ever played any sport and say he can't win.
Hey everyone, welcome to Hospitality Bites. I'm your host and self-proclaimed hospitality hustler, Colleen Silk, also known as the Mompreneur. Today's episode marks the first of last 7 episodes of my final season of Hospitality Bites. It's been a lot of fun, but it's time to delve into some new beginnings for me, so new media in the works, but more on that later. So today I'm joined by Michael. Do you want to go by Michael or Mike, by the way? I should have asked.
Oh, that's okay. I would say always Michael, but everybody calls me Tips.
Okay, well, I'll call you Michael to start. Today I'm joined by Michael Tips, seasoned food and beverage expert, entrepreneur, restaurateur, CEO and co-founder of the ultimate food and beverage consulting group, Maverick Theory, as well as an advisory board member for the Bar and Restaurant Expo. It's quite a mouthful. And you're a dad.
And I'm a dad.
And you're a dad on top of it.
First of all, I really appreciate that because I've been fortunate to do some pretty cool podcasts, and nobody talks about the fact that I'm a dad. So thank you.
Of course. I mean, my husband is such a girl dad and there's a lot of really great dads in my life. I've had a lot of great dads on the show, and I think it's always important to acknowledge that us in the industry are also parents.
Sure.
Sometimes forgotten, and it's really fucking hard sometimes to be a parent in this industry. So absolutely.
Well, I got to be honest with you because I want to admit this so that way my daughter can watch it when she's older. She's about 4 now. She'll be 4 in December. And that moment where the doctor calls you and says, do you want to know the sex? That happened. And I had a freak out. I remember it was like May or June of 2020. And they were like, you're going to have a little girl. And everything inside of me stopped. And I actually had a real meltdown. I got really freaked out. I don't even know why. But I think it was 2 things. I think it was 1, the fact that all of a sudden, this thing that I created with my wife, all of a sudden, because it had a sex, meant it was going to be a real person.
It's a real, yes.
And all of a sudden, something just hit me. And I assumed I was having a boy. I'd already figured that in my head, like most men think they're always going to have boys.
Boys first, yeah.
And I really was in kind of like a bad shape for like a 24-hour period. And I wish I could say, I know you want to have a healthy baby, and that's always the goal. But I genuinely was upset. And it's awesome because it was the dumbest 24 hours of my life. I was a complete idiot. And I'd never in a million years even think about having a boy because my daughter is that fucking cool.
That's
awesome.
It's funny. I had the opposite. I thought our daughter was going to be a boy. And so my husband wanted a girl so bad. And when I thought it was a girl, I actually found out before he did, which was not on purpose, but it was an accident. I was slightly disappointed, and then I saw how excited he was a couple weeks later. It was like, okay, this is really cool. Now he's excited, so I'm going to be excited. And then we ended up having a boy a couple years later too. So now I've got 1 of each, but I think we're set on the kid train right now. So let mommy dive back into things outside of my mom universe. That's why I call myself a mompreneur, because I'm a mom and entrepreneur at the same time, and it's okay to be both, I think. And there's a lot of dads that are also both. But I don't think we acknowledge a lot of working parents. So I always make a point to do that.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. So I want to bring it back to your beginnings. Before you were a dad and all these things, you were a young buck starting in Florida, right? Is that where your beginnings in hospitality? So how did that come about? Because you were pretty young when you started.
Yeah, my journey was totally opposite of most people in the industry. Like I not in regards to the venues themselves. I started in Florida. I grew up in South Florida. And I worked at chain restaurants like every other kid out of high school.
Mm-hmm.
Busting, running, dishwashing, being a server. And I definitely had no interest in the hospitality world. I thought it was an interesting place to talk to people, and I liked how it was unconventional and you made great money for what you did. But I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be an actor, and when I was a kid, I started modeling when I was about 18, and I was definitely a comic book dork who overnight hit puberty, and all of a sudden I was up for modeling jobs. So on the inside, I was like, "Oh my God, they're going to figure out that I'm a nerd on the inside." But I loved it, and then I started booking commercials. I didn't do very well as a model at all, but I did really well booking commercials. So I was like, "Cool, I'll do acting," and then that's how I got to New York. So I had an agent; they brought me to New York, and the irony was, the short version is I opened the Tribeca Grand in 2000, which was the hottest bar hotel in the world for about 2 years. But during that time, I was auditioning. So I booked a soap opera when I was about 20 years old, 21 years old. So I booked a contract role on One Life to Live on ABC for a year.
Stop.
Yeah. So I did that. And so that's that look on your face. You're like, oh,
I just did not expect that to come out of your mouth.
Yeah. So, well, I like to talk about it because when people look at me up online, they see like actory stuff, and I feel like so many actors are full of shit, especially when they get later in life and they're doing stuff. So it's like that. That point is that for me, it was the opposite experience. I left the hotel. I had my own dressing room, was a regular on a TV show, and I was really unhappy. But I didn't know it because I was 21 years old. I was making great money as an actor, and I really loved the attention, but I didn't like the fast food industry of acting, which is soap opera acting, and it's very hard for actors to do. It's very difficult. So, but I got myself fired after about a year on the show, and during that time, I would go to the hotel every day and hang out with all my bar restaurant friends, and I really enjoyed them. And they were very serious in New York in a way that they weren't in Florida. You know, it was very different.
World.
So very, very different, and it was cool. So anyway. Point being is it all happened opposite for me, and I fell in love with food and beverage in New York, not knowing that I would fall in love with it. Most people go into the business because they want to be actors or some other career.
Right.
I actually went into it and went back to it because I loved it.
That's amazing. Yeah, those people that are like struggling actors are bartenders and servers, and they don't love it. They hate it, but they do it because they have to pay their bills because they're struggling to be an actor. No, I did not expect you to say that you were on a soap opera. That was not anything that I read about you.
Okay, well, then I've exposed myself.
That I've combed. I see. That's why I love doing these interviews, is because I just kind of get to know the person a little bit. I don't do a super, super deep dive, because then when the conversations are happening like this, I also now know that you have a background in soap opera acting, which is very fascinating. Was that so when you were in bars and restaurants and everything, you obviously were very charismatic. Did that help, taking that kind of like acting bug and ability to kind of adapt to be anything for anyone? Did that help you in the bar and restaurant scene?
I mean, I would say it definitely did, but I don't know. You know, I would think that it would, but I had a lot of friends who were actors, and a lot of them would be at the bar and they'd bartend, and they had no personality behind the bar either.
That's,
you know, I'll leave them unnamed, but
it's okay. You know, I'm not gonna pry.
No, it was also 25 years ago, but my point is like I remember dealing with some actors behind the bar, and they weren't very good bartenders, and that's where I realized. I remember telling one of my buddies who was an actor, who was premier bartender in New York. I remember him being kind of shitty as a bartender, and him making a comment about it, and me saying, "What's going to happen when you get cast to play Jesus? Are you going to pretend to be a carpenter, or are you going to know carpentry? So why don't you convince everybody you're a great bartender?"
Right.
How about that? You know. So it didn't win me over a lot of friendships behind the bar. However, it definitely New York. I mean, I don't want to give bartending all the credit. It really was New York City.
That exposure.
Yeah, I mean, New York and hospitality was like going into the Navy SEALs versus the Boy Scouts.
I had PJ Ong as a guest on my show like a year and a half ago, and he talked about working in New York and the difference of being a pastry chef there, and like the grind and the work compared to anywhere else was like something he had never experienced.
Yeah, it's crazy.
People expect a certain standard. It's just kind of like its own special food mecca, beverage mecca. I think it's definitely more of a beverage mecca than I realized until recently. Like the bar scene and the beverage programs are really, really top notch there.
Yeah, I definitely got a lot of humble pie when I first moved there, because you're a kid from Florida who's used to serving like rum runners and white Russians. And then you move to New York, and I went there we can talk about the mixology craze, but I went there pre-mixology craze, where it was still Cosmos and margaritas and things like that.
Very Sex and the City.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I would still have college students walk up to me who are 22 years old and order a Negroni in 2000.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
And I'm like, what's a Negroni? Because I'm a kid from Florida.
Right.
You know? So the clientele in New York is definitely more well-versed in what normal is there and what they order.
When you talk about the mixology craze, which I'm sure some people are like, there was a craze, there was like a whole movement in mixology and like becoming a mixologist, and there's shows about being a mixologist now. And you were like one of the top mixologists of that time period. How did that like come to be? Like, how did you get that title, I guess?
The funny thing is that it's definitely, I always joke, because one of our co-founders, Dave Foss, who does, he does a lot of stuff for media as a sommelier. We always joke, because at least with a sommelier, there's a test you have to take, right?
Very true.
Where with bartenders, what people call a mixologist, I say you're a bartender who knows your shit. Like, mixology is something that definitely the clientele give you, but I think bartenders, it's a generational thing. How I got into it was we're bartending at a high level, at high volume, at a high level in hotels. But I was very fortunate. I had a once in a lifetime opportunity. Most people don't know this, but the person behind the entire movement, and God rest his soul, he would never say mixology ever. It would never come out of his mouth.
Okay.
Is Sasha Petresky of Milk and Honey. So he opened Milk and Honey in New York in '99, and the thing about Sasha is Sasha created the first what?
I got a thumbs up from you.
Oh, nice. Anyway, unintentional. Sasha created the first real speakeasy in New York since the Prohibition, and it was called Milk and Honey. And there was no sign, and you had to knock on the door, and there was about 14 seats that had house rules, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And he had such a level of, there was no snootiness to the bartenders. They were all about the guest experience. And I was so fortunate. The Tribeca Grand and the Soho Grand, the Grand Life Group, paid for Sasha to come in and consult at the hotels. And I'm 24 years old. He takes me under his wing, and he teaches me not only what his program was, but he taught me how to teach mixology.
It's huge.
And bartend. So then I started working with that. And I didn't really know how lucky I was till years later when people saw it on my resume. They're like, holy shit, you work with Sasha. So he's really the godfather of that whole movement. And of course, it's 25 years ago in New York, and then it hits middle American markets 15 years later. So that's how I got into it. And then when I later did some of the TV stuff, a lot of that stuff got classified as mixology expert because of my background, and the TV show needed me to classify. Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering, how did you get that title? Because you're not just a bar expert. You're an all-around expert of the industry and the restaurant and the bar program. Are you in the kitchen at all? Were you ever in the kitchen?
I was never in the kitchen, although I'm the only thing I'm self-proclaimed expert in is my own house kitchen. There, I consider myself an expert. But
same. I do not cook. I've never been in the kitchen, or I was once, but it was just for very bad experience. So I'll never go back.
I mean, I've definitely had pans thrown on my head by executive chefs.
I've had a few things thrown at me. Never a pan. Had a lot of words thrown my way. That's for sure.
Oh yeah. I'm sure it was a different time too.
Yeah. For sure.
No, yeah. I mean, what's funny, and I appreciate. I know that you're being very formal in how you're saying the word expert, but it's very funny. There's certain things in business that I've definitely started steering away from, just because we were talking about it and you brought it up. Is how many self-proclaimed experts there are between social media, YouTube, and consulting, right? And understanding a business versus I'm really good at doing one thing, and I've done it for a long time, so I'm going to teach you about it, right? I definitely am at this place where, when we built Maverick Theory, our goal was, and this isn't a plug, by the way, but if it sounds like one you're listening,
no, we were going to get there anyway, so you go for it.
Yeah. I was going to say, if you happen to be enjoying this podcast, allow this to feel like a plug, but it's not. Is when you look at I like using aviation a lot as an example, because I think it's something that people universally understand the value of a pilot with their own life, right?
Yeah.
And people watch enough movies, ironically, like Top Gun Maverick, right? Or the old Top Gun, or movies like that. And when you look at aviation as a whole in real life, the instructor's value is based on the proficiency of the student pilot, right? That's the quality of when you look at an instructor, the instructor might say, I'm an ex-Top Gun instructor, and I was in combat in Afghanistan as a pilot. But if he's not a good teacher and can't get the most out of the student, then he's an ineffective instructor, regardless of his resume, right? So that's how we look at things in Maverick Theory. So like even when people say graciously, and I always humbly accept and say thank you, someone calls you an expert, I feel like that is something that somebody else has to call you, that you're not allowed to call yourself that. Because if you really know the world, you know there's so much to learn, but ultimately only people can decide whether you're an expert or not, based on the quality of your work. Anybody who says they're an expert, I'm very wary of.
Oh, that's why I call myself the self-proclaimed hospitality hustler, because I'm
Great,
like,
though.
but I said, like, no
Great.
one's ever called me that. I've just been hustling in this damn industry for 20 plus years, trying to make a name for myself. And it's so funny that you said that. Having to validate your expertise in something is really, really hard. And I actually reached out to my former boss to have him write a recommendation letter for me, because I was like, how can I explain to people that I am really good at my job? How did you run a restaurant from 700 miles away remotely?
Right.
Like, and I was like, well, I did it because I was really, really good at it. I saw what was needed, when was needed. I knew when to, like, bob and weave. So it's so funny that because I actually had to reach out to my ex-boss not that long ago and just asked him to write me a recommendation letter, because I wanted that validation. Like, am I crazy? Am I not as good as I thought I was? Because people are asking me a lot of questions to prove my worth, and I'm getting really fucking sick of having to do that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
no, I know. I know what you mean. Like one of the things I talk to some of our junior consultants about is when they kind of come to us when they're working with our team and they're like, okay, how do I quantify that? But they don't have the experience you may have where you're like, I was really fucking good at it, right? That's how you can, and ultimately people could view that as being pompous, but if it's the truth, then it's the truth, right?
right.
So,
And I feel confident saying that now.
right. And because it's result oriented. So we always tell people like, listen, if you really want to value yourself, if you want to prove your worth, we're in an interesting point in time where people mistake worth for value. I said, so like people go, what's my worth? I'm like, your worth is $100 billion. You're a human being,
Yeah.
but your value to this business and this model might be 40 grand a year.
Right, which is a completely different thing. And that's, I think people have a hard time understanding where you're
Yeah.
fitting into a certain place. And especially like you talked about, like, people proclaiming themselves as things. And for me, I had a really tough time struggling in the industry when people were telling me that they were better at my job than me. And I would feel like I'd have to work 10 times harder. And then I found myself like burning myself out to do that, to like that, like to show like, oh, I'm just as good as you are. Don't tell me I can't handle it. And that's when I kind of like things got muddy for me within the industry, like 15 years ago. I like wasn't sure where I was going, what I was doing. It was a very tough time for me. And that was like I would say a big turning point. Did you have any of those hurdles where like you were kind of questioning, like, I've been deemed this mixologist expert or I'm this bar expert? Did you ever have to navigate away from that?
What a great question.
It's not a loaded question either. It's a genuine.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, I'd started another company that I worked on for about 6 years called Invictus Hospitality. And it was the goal was like, how do I bring in essentially like an Ocean's 11 group for consulting, right? Mm-hmm. And how do I build that? I really didn't understand how to scale it. And I started looking at the effectiveness of what we were doing and ultimately my effectiveness meaning if I have to dedicate my life to somebody else's business to make the ideas work that they want to work so they're profitable and they're happy, but I have to dedicate so much of my time and energy to do that, I might be really ineffective at what I'm doing. Even if I'm getting the result, it requires 10 times the amount of time, so how effective am I? So when I really looked at that, that's when I realized I'm a big believer in who's, not hows. And I realized I had some of the wrong who's around me based on what I wanted to achieve. And I was also needed to really like look at what wasn't working for me.
I love that. Who's, not hows.
Yeah.
That's an incredible way to look at something. So the people that you were initially partnering up with just wasn't aligning with the
one of the best, that's basically it. I mean, one of the best examples I've ever heard about this is from Ben Hardy. He gave a great example of Michael Jordan in the 90s. And he says all people think about are the 6 titles that he won, and he's done all these things, and he's Michael Jordan. And I'm an avid Jordan fan. But he reminded, before Phil Jackson came to the Chicago Bulls, the famed coach. Jordan was getting his ass kicked by the Pistons, and he couldn't win. And people forget at the time that in the league, He wasn't beloved Jordan yet. People said he couldn't win. He'll never be Magic. He'll never be Larry. Scoring titles don't win championships. Like, he was heavily criticized, and people said he couldn't win. He was a prime example of who's not house.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
So you bring in somebody who's arguably the greatest athlete who's ever played any sport and say he can't win. Right. So think about that for a second, right? Like, so then you bring in Phil Jackson, you bring in Scottie Pippen, you bring in these people, and all of a sudden he starts winning. So right. So does his talent and his ability, his drive, his ambition, and his ability to get along with people really mean that he's going to win? No, he needed the right who's. So, you know, it opens things up a lot. It's an interesting way of thinking about it.
I love that. I'm a prayerful, faithful person, and this past year's been really hard for me. And I kept like praying like for a sign like that things are going to get better. And I heard pray for guidance to find that sign, or find guidance to get you to where you need to go. And it like totally changed my perspective of what, like, I was so down the dumps. I was like dumpster fire, fucking dumpster fire. And I was like, what do I need to do to pray for? And that change of like, pray for guidance to find you to where you need to go, or like find the right guidance. And that has totally changed my trajectory of this like podcast and like this purpose of it and going this new direction. So I'm not with it wasn't really a who's and how's type thing. It was more of like different perspective. It's okay to change that little, like a small little pivot. Some people don't like the word pivot now, but you know, pivot's not. Yeah.
Well, look, I want to stop for a second because I want to tell you that I really appreciate you bringing up being mindful, prayer, because I think that's interesting. I think that when people talk about things like prayer, everyone gets worried that we're going to be doing a podcast. I'm like, oh God, I clicked on a Christian podcast. Yeah. Like, they automatically get very phobic about things like that. The thing that's like, whether you believe in it, don't believe in it, whether you are focused on, you know, manifesting things, which I think that's a bastardized word, right? Like, all those things is what's really cool about prayer when people talk about it. So kudos to you, is you can't talk about prayer without humility. That's the best part about it. You don't get to pray and be cocky. It's kind of like it'd be like a funny SNL bit. Like, hey, God, what's the fucking deal? Get me this shit. You know, right. Like, you could never be cocky and be in prayer, because you have to admit that you need something, you know, or that you feel like you're lacking something. And it's like the ultimate, like, Hail Mary in a really wonderful way. So kudos. I just have to acknowledge that. That's cool.
I had to, because I love this industry so much, hospitality, and what I was doing wasn't working, and, you know, really just had to re-navigate and refocus. And that was so great when I found you on LinkedIn and Maverick Theory. Like, it was very serendipitous because I just had Brian Duffy on. Brian can tell you, I didn't know his brother is Mike Duffy, which is someone that I connected with like a week or so prior.
His brothers are awesome.
Well, I'm Irish Catholic, so like the last name Duffy just is like thrown around in my world. So I didn't put two and two together at all, which is my own fault. But I didn't realize that you guys were working together to create Maverick Theory. And then like one day it went across like my Instagram screen. I swear it was like the phone was listening to me, because then Maverick Theory was like, coming soon, get to know us. And I was like, what is this? So I saw you and I reached out because I was like, this is really interesting that you're gathering a group of different people from all different types of the industry to create, you even said it, are you a consulting firm? Are you food and beverage experts? Like, what are you? Sure. How did you come up with, maybe your co-founders helped you come with this, but how did you know that you needed like a collective group of different professionals to make this work? Do you even know?
No, I do. I know very clearly. Okay. I promise.
Okay.
It's weird that you do a podcast with somebody. They're interviewing you, kind of, right? Because you're very good at this.
Thank you.
You told me I was charismatic. I have to give it back to you.
Thanks.
So the thing is that you ask very great questions, and it doesn't feel like you're being interviewed. So thank you.
Well, I like talking to people.
I get that.
It's a great problem, probably.
No, it's really good. It's
Thanks.
Nice when you feel like you're not. I've done some podcasts, and I shouldn't say this out loud, but fuck it. It's unbelievable to me that podcasts are very much the new Facebook page, and and it's everyone's got one. They never stop to think, is people's time worth this? And I think if they did, they would have more of a sense of responsibility to do something awesome. I digress. You're awesome. Here's the thing. So my all this started for me. The genesis of this started with there's no ultimate resource in our business. In hospitality, as one of like the top 3 or 4 businesses that's over 100,000 years old, right? One of the oldest businesses ever, next to like carpentry and prostitution, is hospitality. And
Right.
yet, in today's world, it still has no qualifying metric. Think about it. It's got nothing that says your way to do this is actually right. You can do that with airplanes. You can do it with carpentry. You can do it with mechanical engineer and plumbing or being a doctor. But when it comes to owning a bar or restaurant, anyone can go do it. And I say this all the time when I speak in do public speaking, is just because I brush my teeth doesn't mean we want to go open a dentist shop.
Right. Right. That's not how it
So,
works.
right. So everybody enjoys eating out and drinking their whole life. And they say, oh, you must make a lot of money doing that. Look how packed that restaurant is. They say, let's take our life savings, put our house up for leverage with a bank, and then open a restaurant and figure it out for the first time. So that's why so many people fail. However, our goal with Maverick Theory was, because it is subjective, the real goal for us is we have obviously bigger plans down the road of what Maverick Theory is going to become. But the overall goal was to become the ultimate resource. So it starts with a collective consulting group, and it couldn't just be food and beverage, because we recognize that most of the failures in this business start with leasing and construction. They don't start with a bad menu. So we were like, okay, so we took everything we knew about design in restaurants and we started creating concepts using what we understood, and people just started really, really loving our concepts. Concepts meaning not that it's people think concept. What we first learned, to be honest with you, is that people, even highly successful restaurateurs, don't know how to classify what a concept is in hospitality. They don't. Like if you walk into a restaurant and go, what's the concept? They go, oh, it looks like an Italian food fair. But what's the concept?
A bistro.
Right. Right. So it's, and no one's really wrong. So if we broke it down where we're like, okay, there's the function, there's the theme, and then there's the aesthetic, and they can all be collectively connected or different. So we started building those formulas. Then we started working with our architects, and we started challenging classic architecture models and why they take so long and why they're so expensive. And we do our architecture totally opposite of any firm in the country.
Okay.
So we started doing that. So as an example, which I mean, anybody listening to this who's dealt with an architect will appreciate this. For those of you who don't know, when you're dealing with an architecture firm, and this is garden variety, the majority of them, not all of them, but most of them in the world, bill very much like a lawyer does. They say, Colleen, you want to open your own restaurant, and you're an experienced restaurateur. We're going to do your first 2D layout of your new space. And you say, great. They'll go, we'll get it to you in 3 weeks. They get it to you. Oh, we did our reviews and we did this and we did that. And then you get it and you go, yeah, but your ice machine's right next to the bread, to the oven. That's not going to work. So that happens with every restaurateur and every architect for the most part. And there are architects who obviously hire consultants and they do a better job. But ultimately, the process of figuring out how your restaurant is going to lay out, or your bar or hotel, is a process that you're paying for to teach your architect what you want.
What you want.
Because they're a technician. What we do is, and there's a reason why architects have to do that. To their credit, they have to justify a lot of their skills. If they say, oh, I can probably do all this in a week, then someone's going to go, well, why am I going to pay you 25 grand for that? Right. So to their credit, there's a reason why their model is old. However, our model is totally different. We say, Colleen, you want to open your restaurant. Your space is 2,700 square feet. It's a second generation space. We're having our team of architects and our designer and our operations people come to your location and spend 3 full days with you. Be ready to work for 10 to 12 hours a day. And you say, okay, at the end of 3 days, we're going to open up. We're going to show you multiple layouts in CAD. And we're going to explain why we put everything where we put it based on what you want. We're going to explain the efficiencies, the modularity of the space, and how it will help with your programming. Then we're going to show you 3D Revits of every version. 3D Revit meaning a 3D animated version of it. And then in real time, you're going to go, I love all this. Can we mix option 2 with option 7 and then move the oven over here? We go, we're going to do it right now in real time. And then once you know what your venue is going to look like, where everything goes, that's when we start drawing it.
I love that.
It's totally opposite. That's just an example of why we're called Maverick Theory. It's not just, it's a cute name, of course, but everything we do is slightly different than the industry does it. And it's for the benefit of the person who hires us. And it streamlines the process.
I've only been part of one restaurant under construction from start to finish. And I was working for a restaurant group in DC. And now they're a very established restaurant group in DC. They've got like 20 some restaurants. You might know them. But I did get to see the process of how they built out their restaurant. It used to be an old bank because they were the ones telling the architects what they wanted and how to do it. And when it came together fast. But they also had like millions of dollars to do it. And like this was how it was going to get done. So I never have really seen how an architect may come in from like the outside who's not a part of the industry and how it can be this long drawn out process, which then ends up costing you thousands of dollars before you even open the doors.
Right.
And
yeah,
then
and also and then every time you want to change your mind about something, the architect says, sure, no problem. We'll do that, but it's going to cost you X because it's like a red line for a legal document.
Right. It just never ends. I
Yeah.
love that. It's important to start from the bones. I mean, that's the whole basis of a business. Is like the bones of like your business is the building and the facility and operate, and like the flow of the space really matters. I don't think people think about that unless you're in the industry.
Right.
Flow of space is so important.
Well, and because when you're dealing with flow, you're dealing with timing.
Yeah.
So we always tell people, like, listen, if you really look at the metrics of a bar restaurant, almost every single bar and restaurant in the world makes the majority of their money in about a 2.5 hour window of the day. Mm-hmm. So when you break down just the 2.5 hours by itself, and you break it down by the second, you see the value of each second in that 2.5 hour window. And when you have to move 3 feet in the wrong direction because a bar isn't mirrored correctly, you're losing money. So we're able to kind of break those metrics down and show them to people. But also it's the same thing with our consultants. We want to make sure that they're in a cool position of being able to go and do really, really cool shit with their clients and make great progress for them. And
so for your consultants, you kind of have like a mixture of front of house and back of house. And your co-founders, what is their background like?
So the first answer, my co-founders are one of them is in project management outside of food and beverage, but I've always played in the world, but he's a great project manager and entrepreneur. The other one has been working with me for 20 years and is a sommelier, restaurant owner, has done everything from nightclubs to dive bars, and is really well respected in the wine world. So, the thing is we looked at all the models the last 20 years, and it was weird to look up consulting firms because it was like, you look them up and they were weird. It's like they're either one very regional, or they would say, "Oh, we do everything," but they don't really. Like they sub everything out to other people. But then, and then there would be a weird thing where it's like there's 3 or like 30 or 40 people in a consulting firm, but they have these titles of positions you've never even heard of in hospitality.
It's not relatable.
Yeah, it's all bullshit. So we basically said, how do we get the real, here's a better way to say it. What Nike does for their athletes is what we do for our consultants. The only difference is that for us, we look at it and say, imagine if Nike was involved in the NFL as like part of the rules or part of the gaming. Because we understand the job itself, where we're not like advertising just or selling a product. So we take people, instead of taking the old guy, no offense to the old guys out there, I'll be one, but the 75-year-old guy who was like one of the co-founders of TGI Fridays in the 70s is not one of our lead consultants. Like we will say, okay, we have back of house, front of house, every position known to man, particularly in operations and in culinary and beverage. But we take people who work at the highest level in our industry. Mm-hmm. So like, as an example, I just got back from, a job up in the Northeast. And it was like, we brought in people who were like Open Beauty in Essex in New York, one of the highest volume restaurants. One of our director of ops opened Zuma in New York. It's a $28 million a year restaurant in New York City, but she's our director of ops. She does consulting, but she'll go do a bar in the middle of nowhere with that level of understanding. So with that, or whether it's a Michelin rated chef or a James Beard nominated beverage person, the key with us is that you got to be really fucking cool. That's a prerequisite for us. Like you can have the
that's fair.
You got to have it because it's great that you have a big resume, but does anyone want to work with you?
No one wants a dud.
Yeah. And look, we also have, but it's not all rainbows and sunshine, as you know. I mean, there's times where we go to jobs and it's ugly for a while. We just got off of a job where we basically had half the staff quit, other half got fired because it was like, the truth is in their world, they thought they were the best thing ever. Mm-hmm. But we saw it as you're taking advantage of your ownership and they did put it this way. And I'll give you an example of a standard. How do you deal with a bunch of servers who actually don't know their menu and they think that's okay?
They'd be right off the schedule.
Right, exactly. But then when you go to a market where they're used to that, they go, oh, these Maverick Theory guys are assholes. They're getting rid of us. And we're the ones who run this town. And you're like, well, yes, as long as the owner's paying for it, you know? So they forget the whole business part. So we have to come in, and sometimes we're the bad guy for about a month. And then about 2 months later, the owner's super stoked. And they're like, we're making money. And they have a whole new staff in there who really cares and knows their shit. And it's a thing of the past. So it can be rough at first.
So do you help them? I think it's important for people that do run businesses to know this. Do you help them like set the standards that they should have?
Yeah,
like,
it's really hard.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to tell an owner that they're salt of the earth, that they're amazing, that they're generous, that they're wonderful employers, and that nobody respects them.
I've been there before, not as a person that wasn't respected, but I've gone into places like that, and it makes you feel really bad because you're like, God, you're spending so much money on this place. It's your livelihood, and you're here and you're taking time away from your family, and your staff sucks, or they're talking badly, or they're shit-faced behind the bar, and that's your money that's now literally and figuratively down the drain. You know, it's really hard to be the bad guy, but it's also good to be a third party to be the bad guy and also support that owner, because it's a very lonely place if you are a solo entrepreneur.
It is, and it's like, I think for us it's tough. It's always tough when you have that first push and you have the backlash with the staff, and it very much is like reality TV, unfortunately. The only thing about it that makes it more realistic is that you have to be there to see them through the end, where you bring in the new staff and you train them, and there's the resolution and there's the understanding.
So do you not leave until it's completed?
Yeah, we have. But first of all, if there wasn't a plug, I have my company sign behind me. So there's your plug.
Yeah, there it is.
So we're like, how do we do this? How do we create a service that is cost effective for our clients? Where like, if they're, let's say we know how tight the margins are in this business. So how can you come on as a consulting group, pay people top dollar, charge top dollar, and then hope that they're profitable? It's counterintuitive. So we created a program called the Maverick League, and we have groups that sign up for it. We basically charge them per year what you would pay a floor manager in your market, right? But they pay it monthly, so when they can afford it, they basically get they get 3 visits a year. But it's like this really has to do with what it is. We do weekly calls with them with their entire management team for the year.
Oh, wow.
So that way we can actually support them. And then we say, listen, we'll come out for 3 trips. We limit how many consultants. But as an example, so Colleen, if you own your own venue, and you're like, the first 4 months, I just need to focus on my managerial infrastructure, SOPs, standards, meeting times, deadlines, etc. Cool. Maverick Theory is going to be on the phone with you every week for that, with your team or you, or what is going to handle it as like your liaison. But then you go, okay, cool. Thankfully, you guys nailed that. Now we're 6 months in and I want to redo my back bar. Then we're going to send in our architects and we're just going to draw it for you. But we're not charging you more for that. So
that's awesome.
It's like a subscription service, but we have to do it where it's really affordable for the client, or else it doesn't make sense.
It's very tangible. It's like real stuff.
Yeah.
It's not I think you should be doing this. I looked at your numbers and this, that, and the other thing. Like that sounds very real, hands-on. We care that you succeed or fail.
We get really close to our clients.
It's people like us. I'll put myself in that mix.
Yeah.
When you're like a lifer, you feel for the people that care and that are like business owners that really do want to do a good job, or the bar manager that's trying his hardest but is failing. Because God, I know what it feels like to want it so bad to be successful, because it's your life. Like hospitality people understand each other, and we speak a certain language, and we want each other to do well.
Yeah, man, we definitely get attached. I mean, I think one, the job never ends. You never get it all done. And there's always a line of business ethics involved, because I think when you're in a position where you have the power of influence, you also have, arguably, I'm very lucky. And I mean truly lucky. I have arguably the greatest group in a consulting collective that's ever been assembled. And that's a hell of a thing to say, right? There's definitely hospitality groups out there, the Jean Georges of the world, that have accomplished far more than we have. That's not what I mean. I mean, in the sense of a collective group of talent and different skill sets that I've never seen put together in one roster. So for me to get to walk into a room, I get to hold my shoulders pretty high. And I got to be very mindful of, I always say consulting is like being a dentist, right? Like you can always find a way to make money for yourself by saying, you've got a cavity and I could let it sit, or you can get a root canal. It's really up to the dentist to figure that out. And you have to have a lot of integrity to be able to say, you don't really need this right now. You can do it later. Right.
Right.
So I think that's probably the line that we try to walk the most, of really trying to serve our clients and take and build our business at the same time.
Well, yeah, I mean, how new are you guys? Was it just past March?
Yeah, we launched in March because prior to that, I had broken up meaning I left my last company that I founded, and I wanted to build this company. The irony is the people that we're working with, because I mean, we're basically at our infancy stages. The company is 6 months old.
Yes, I know.
But yeah. So anyone listening to this is like, what the hell is this guy talking about? This company just got started. So the thing is, the majority of people in our company, we've worked together for 20 years. We'd have just done it in different ways. So then we formalized it, So that's how it's going.
Well, it's funny that you said that. I was watching one of your YouTube clips on the website that you and Brian did with the Bar Crashers. Is that what you called it?
Well, it was so much fun.
And you said something that I have to ask. This is totally irrelevant. Only to the people you work with. And I know, Brian, you guys go back a really long time.
Yeah.
But you hadn't heard of Golden Tea? Is that the game Golden Tea?
Yeah.
How is that possible? You've been in the industry. First of all, out of all the things you guys talked about, that was like the takeaway I had. I was like, this man has been in this industry for 30 years and has never heard of Golden Tea. It was like the thing in like 2008, 2012. Like,
I think it was because I was in New York and they were more like
where I live.
Yeah, I think I know what it was. At that point, I just moved to LA, and my life has been very mixed with a lot of different types of things I've done and entrepreneurially. And at that point, I was in the process of creating TV shows for the first time and selling them.
Right.
So I was consulting on food and beverage stuff, but I was not in the scene.
Yeah. I was like, that's wild to me. Golden Tea was the prime thing for after shift, have your shift drink and play Golden Tea till like 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Was like my world. That's why I was like,
oh yeah. No, I know
crazy.
about it now.
It's so funny.
Bar Crashers was fun, man. That was something that me and Brian did at the time, that we were working with a couple different sponsors, and they said, "Oh, can you shoot a pilot of it?" So we did it for an online series. It never ended up going anywhere, but me and him just had so much fun together. We have such great chemistry on camera. We can basically finish each other's sentences, which is a lot of fun to work with people like that. And we've always been like that. The irony is, when me and him both did Bar Rescue, we were never on an episode together.
I did not know that. That's really interesting. Because you guys were like you two were the beginning of the show.
Yeah.
Of the infancy of it, right?
Yeah, I did the first 6 out of 10 episodes of the first season. And that's where I met his brother. His brother was one of the producers.
Stop. I did not know that. That's amazing.
Yeah. So I met his brother before him, and then later we did something. We were doing something with Taffer, but yeah, the first season was awesome. I did a couple episodes the second season, then I quit, and that was that.
And you said you always felt good about just kind of branching off, right?
Even quitting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be gentle with my words.
Oh no, you don't got to be gentle. It's fine. It's always important because it was so long ago, but when I first got on the show, it was because there was a producer that was doing it. It's an amazing producer. Her name is Sun DeGraff, and we had been producing a documentary together, and she came to me and said, "Hey, do you still do bar and restaurant consulting?" And I said, "Yeah." And she just said, "Okay, well, can we film you when you're consulting?" I said, "Yeah, do whatever you want." And then she came and filmed me, and then she said, "Hey, we want you to do the show." And I said, what network is it on? And she said, Spike TV. And I'm like, forget it. There's no way. And she's like, why not? And I'm like, because I have a real resume and people respect me in this industry. I'm not going to be on some bullshit show. And then she showed me the pilot, and the pilot was awesome, to John's credit and Spike's credit. And then I ended up doing the show for 6 episodes, and it was very real the first season because nobody knew who we were. And then the second season, it got incredibly, reality TV and fake is a nice way to say it.
Yeah.
And then because once I started being asked to lie, it was just like, yeah, I'm done.
Right. Well, it's also like, to your credit, as you said, when you are an actual industry professional, you don't want to make a mockery of like what we're doing. And those that maybe like, if you can offer that help, like I want to help you.
Yeah.
That's super important. Or I don't want to look like an idiot either. Or like, I understand that because you can tell the shift.
Look, I'm incredibly grateful to the show because it gave me a lot of exposure. And at the time, I was able to build a consulting business from it, and it was cool. I think that I give John credit, too, for creating a reality show that took the world by storm.
For real.
Yeah, like John is a very, very smart marketing guy. But outside of that, it was a very, very fake reality, and it's not really the industry's fault. It's the nature of television, and also what happens to people when they're on TV is always challenging. Yeah. So there's not anybody who typically doesn't want to be on TV. So when you take a bartender, when you look at the experts they had on the show a lot, they became experts, but it was also like maybe they were in a nightclub in Miami, but now they're a hospitality expert. And they are subjectively compared to the average person.
Yeah, I mean, I agree to disagree, because there's some people on there I was like, oh God, what are you talking about? Your your service standards are not even close to what I would be pushing people, but I digress.
Here's the thing. So your pushback is 100% relevant. So here's what I would say. One of the critiques I got on one episode that I did, I'll share this with you. Hopefully the guy who wrote the critique about me is listening. So it's basically there's a line in there where I'm at this bar in like Yorba Linda in California, and the edit is very different than the reality of what you said. So the editors and the producers are in charge of what comes out. So as an example, one of the things I said, they asked me a question about like the nature of cocktails. And I was just like, look, if anybody wants a Manhattan shaken, they should be shot and killed. And I'm like totally kidding around, doing my thing. But the way that it's cut by saying any guest who would want that should be shot and killed versus a guest gets the way they want it. Right. And the way it came out was, this guy doesn't know anything about hospitality, because that's the way some fucking TV editor cut me.
Right.
So even though you might be on there pushing for a standard, the Colleen standard, that John Taffer goes, yeah, that's awesome. Do what she said. You're going to have some 24-year-old junior editor editing it with a producer who doesn't know anything about hospitality going, yeah, look at the way she said that. That sounds funny.
Right. Do it that way.
Right. And then you have an expert in hospitality judging Colleen going, yeah, she doesn't know what the hell she's talking about.
I mean, that's pretty like on point of what I was basically saying. Because I was like, what the hell are you talking about? You're setting people up to fail.
Yeah.
What the hell are you doing?
The thing that's tough about that show is that the people who were brought onto it were going to fail anyway.
My dad, if he listens to this, there was a restaurant in Silver Spring, Maryland that was done. And it, to this day, has bothered him what this woman
Is this the Pirate Bar one?
Yes!
So
growing up in my neighborhood.
Story for you. Go ahead.
Growing up in that neighborhood, it was, people were like, what in the heck are you doing? This is the weirdest concept you ever had. John comes in, it's great. My dad literally was like, man, I would actually go there. I would go to downtown Silver Spring, go to the quarry, and maybe go over there next door. And then the changes, I was like, what the hell is happening? It drives my dad crazy to this day. And that was like 15 years ago.
So what drives him crazy? The fact that he changed it, or the fact that it went back?
That she went back.
So here's the thing. So here's a funny story. So look, the reality is John is a marketing genius, but I'm just going to say what everybody thinks. Okay. We all know what cool bars are like, and they're not the ones that John came up with, but they're not just John, it's the network. Like you went from Pirate Bar and you called it Corporate Bar. Like it doesn't, it's soulless. It has less soul than a Kinko's. Like it doesn't make any sense. And I'm just saying what everybody thought. They're like, Corporate Bar, huh? So maybe the pirate thing was cheesy as hell, but it was very clear that it had an identity.
That's right. It was what it was.
Right. So like my point is that John, like I said, I'll give him all the credit in the world for being a badass in marketing, but some of the concepts were Spike TV and blah, blah, blah. But my point being is that, so I have a client in Baltimore, right? So he said, hey, we go to Maryland, and we're in Springs. Of course we were in Maryland. And he said, oh, you recognize that bar? I'm like, no, I don't, because I wasn't on that episode.
Okay.
So he's like, oh, let's just go check it out, because it went back to being a pirate bar. So I looked it up and I saw the thing. I'm like, sure, I don't care. So I went in with him, and I got like the third degree look from the owner, from the managers. Like, there's that guy from Bar Rescue, and they were literally grilling me. So because they fucking hated John. There's these videos of them burning all this stuff, all this stuff. So I go, can I talk to you? Which kind of surprised her that I just walked up to her. Right. And I go, you realize I had nothing to do with that episode.
I wasn't there.
I wasn't there. And I'm like, here's who I am, which is cool. And then we had a great time, and we had a beer, and we talked about it, and we were all friends. But I was like, it was brutal, man. Like, a lot of those places were, look, we know in real hospitality and consulting, like, Colleen, if I hire you to come into my bar and do something to train my manager, and you call them a fucking loser in front of their their coworkers and in front of guests, most importantly, which is hilarious, right? That you're gonna yell in front of guests during business hours, during service, and then expect to be paid as a consultant. To completely undermine the entire principle of what I'm trying to create in your business by calling you a moron and a loser, right? And undermining your authority, like all those things, it's all TV bullshit. And, you know, like that's the bigger point is in real life, when you're a consultant, you have to be able to give harsh realities, like, i.e., maybe your staff doesn't respect you right now, but they will if you do X, Y, and Z, versus you're a loser in front of your wife.
Yeah. Yeah, like that's kind of, and it's funny because our industry is so, like, it's a hot and cold environment, right? It gets very hot in the kitchen, which is the reason why it's a saying. People are really trying to stay clear of that environment too now, of like, I'm going to put you down in my kitchen or on my line or whatever it is, because people aren't putting up with it anymore. Like, I had my fair share of being called every name under the book and, you know, hoot and hollered at, and like, I know it's a restaurant, it's a business, and we work with, it's hospitality. It's called that for a reason. And like, I think that narrative is really starting to shift. And it sounds like what you guys are doing is trying to not only like encompass that narrative, but like actually exude it with wherever you're going. Like, it's hospitality. There's different points of service, different parts of this business that you have to be good at. It's about the guest experience and your staff at the end of the day. Are they going to come back tomorrow?
Yeah, we're because a lot of us have hotel backgrounds. We're very like guest focused first on everything. And how to improve guest experience. That always informs every decision you make. It makes everything very violently clear what to do next. But for some reason, people get lost. And I'm like, whatever's going to improve guest experience in these 5 ways, do that. Right.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. But the one thing I will say, because we didn't really get into, I know we have limited time, I think. Right. But the one thing I would say is that there's a lot of criticism of the Gen Z group and the different eras. And I think this is normal of every generation blames the next generation. I think what's interesting about the Gen Z is that because of the technological boom and the way that they've learned how to absorb the world is so violently different than I did. Right. So, you know, I think it's interesting because I was just recently, actually, I was with Duffy, but we spoke to a school in Alaska, a technical school that has a culinary division. So we went and spoke to them. They're all like 16, 17 years old. And it was a really cool opportunity. And the one thing that we told them was a lot of the elements that are echoing what you're saying about having an environment that's positive, that teaches you how to do things versus scream at you and throw a pen at your head. But also at the same time, as we went on that, trust your gut, that feeling of being uncomfortable at work, and that, you know, no one deserves to be treated like that in a work environment. I also said, but don't get it twisted. I said, remember that there's a thing called a standard, and a standard typically means there's a level and a benchmark you have to hit. And that makes people uncomfortable. But being uncomfortable doesn't always mean it's inappropriate. I said, so know that difference. And I was like, so someone holding you to a standard that makes you uncomfortable doesn't mean that you get to go say, oh, that person's mean to me and they're rude.
Right. There is actually a very stark difference, because I don't think they're ever going to experience the experiences that we probably had. They're not going to know what that world was like.
Right.
So they're not going to understand, like, no, what you're getting is like a normal, like, this is the tier of how it works. This is your executive chef. They're holding you to this. You have to go peel, I don't care how many pounds of onions. And it's not torture. And it's not a punishment. This is just how we work. This is how it happens.
So here's the thing that is a tough one for me, right? Let's assume in this scenario that nobody gets hurt. But I've had the Michelin-starred chef be angry at me at 25, and in a nice environment, elevated environment, with me as the bar manager, have a pan thrown at me. Okay, like I've had that experience. But in that scenario, whether it was appropriate or not, what he did, I was in the wrong. Right? I'll say that I was in the wrong for what I did. So in the wrong meaning, it wasn't a big deal, but I was in the wrong place at the wrong time because I wasn't paying attention in service. And I don't think his intention was to actually hit me. It was to scare me, right? But it worked, because certainly I was like, oh, wait a minute. When I, like, as an example, when I walk in, when I'm training now and I have a chef come in and I see a bunch of young line cooks who have never been around a real chef in middle America, and yes, chef, no chef is not about a yes, chef, no chef kitchen. It's about a level of respect.
Yeah.
That creates a hierarchy that makes the kitchen work better. Just like there's a reason why the military is the military and why it always works. Right. So I also tell them, like, remember, I tell front of house staff, when you go back there, you're going into their church, act accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But no one takes that serious until a fucking pan is thrown at their head. Then they're like, oh, wait, that's not appropriate. So there is a level to it where I'm like, I don't think it has to be as severe as throwing something at somebody. But the minute you raise your voice can be used as a weapon. When you're like, hey, pay attention, and it scares somebody, that doesn't mean they're working in a hostile work environment. You know, like there's a lot of that, and that's one reason why a lot of the business is suffering, I think.
They're afraid.
Yeah.
Well, that's like, I could talk about this all day. And we talked about this a little bit, being a Burnt Chef ambassador. As a manager or a business owner, what we're trying to do is like, if we were to come into your space, is like teach you to how to deal with like confrontation. So say you guys have a hot moment in the kitchen, your staff needs to understand that that is not how they see you. This is a hot moment we're having. You messed up that person's table. They have an allergy. This is serious. This is not a joke. At the end of the day, how do you resolve that? Be like, hey, you pissed me off. I don't hate you. I don't want you to go home and stew about this or think that you're a bad person. You didn't understand the severity of the situation. And that's kind of the tools that a lot of us are trying to explain is like, does your staff understand the seriousness of certain things? Like it's not heart surgery, but people are spending their money to be here and we want them to feel comfortable. And if you're having a bad day, they feel that. So here are the tools for you not to have a bad day and for you to take it out on your staff, or how do you for you not to disrespect your manager. Like that's kind of the idea, is because you're right. People don't know how to do, it's either one or the other. You can't be both. You can be both. There's definitely a way to be both. You just have to say it the right way and set it up from the very beginning before those doors open. And that's a huge thing. It's like setting standards and including these other tools, not just like tips of service.
Sure.
Standards of service.
I really appreciate everything you said. I think that you're using those examples of like those hot moments and like something as simple and as complex as allergies, you know, or things like that. But I think that's the thing now, is I think that I don't want to blame it on a generation. I think it's human beings. I'm seeing this across the front on multiple businesses. I consult for a lot of people. I'm very fortunate. A lot of people ask me for advice. And one of the things is that I'm finding that there's a passiveness with people in general, regardless of generation, that is afraid to talk about stuff. And therefore very little gets done. And yet everybody we're in this amazing time and technology where you're able to learn so much at an amazing rate by simply going on YouTube. And you could argue that it's going to replace colleges. Like it's just unbelievable what you can learn at a quicker rate. The problem is that a lot of people can learn a little bit about something and not really know anything about it. So I see a lot of younger and older people coming to the table now with like these general terms, but then when you ask them about it, they don't really know a lot.
They know what it means.
Yeah, but they know all the trigger words. They know all the disruptor and manifest and all these words that are really important words if they're relevant to what you're doing. So my point is that I think it applies a lot to the generational talent in hospitality, where they're like, hostile work environment, you know, appropriate talk at work. And then like when people feel uncomfortable, automatically it's hostile, not based on the perception of what's occurring in the space,
the situation,
but their feeling is the truth. And it's not the truth. It's your interpretation of what's happening. So it's like, one thing I tell staffs I work with is, remember, there's an old saying, events don't kill men. Men's opinions of events kill them. Right. And I always tell them, like, well, all that occurred was two adults disagreed. They raised their voices to find a solution in the moment because timing was the issue. The circumstantial conflict was time. They didn't have any time, so they got elevated and escalated. Right. But that's all that occurred. And then you felt uncomfortable because they reminded you of mom and dad. That doesn't mean that there's a huge problem at the restaurant. Right. But that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and again, I could talk about this all day, but that's what's so important, is that there needs to be like a clear definition of like, how do we resolve and handle these situations so that actually the restaurant can keep running and you're not walking out the door. And that's like a big thing, is I know like my girlfriend, her younger staff, that's a very seasonal town we live in, getting them to understand the urgency to work was really difficult. And she was like, you don't get it. They only have 1 week of vacation. They can barely afford to be here. And they're spending $200 on, like you said, rum runners and, you know, comforters here. So like, get to work, and I'm not mad at you. I just want you to do your job. I'm not
Yeah.
being mean. I'm not being aggressive. You just don't get it. So no, I think what you guys are doing is great. I think it's incredible that you've gathered this like Marvel universe of like different people to create Maverick Theory. It's really cool. I'm being serious. You're laughing, but like my husband's like,
I'm not laughing. No one said it like that. It's very cool.
you said it. I mean, when you
Yeah.
said like you were, collecting these people, I literally was picturing like Tony Stark and like all these people in the Avengers movie.
Yeah,
And like
that's
coming
funny.
together to create like a purpose, like to make the industry move forward, be sustainable, not just like with food, everyone, but like actually operate and run. And I know you said you guys have things in the works, and can you talk about that, or is that for like another day? What's coming down the
Well,
pipe?
I'll tell you one thing. I can't talk about the company only because we signed a bunch of contract stuff, but it's
Fair.
not that big of a deal. So it's not Nike, okay? We're not that big. But the company we did sign with is pretty big, and they're awesome. And what we just did was we're launching it, and I do want to come and talk about it at some point. We have to do this
Sure.
again.
Yeah.
Is we're working with one of the largest beverage online publications in the country and really in the world. They're pretty
Cool.
amazing, and we're going to be launching an operator-based, not only weekly industry news article, but also like individual articles on the topics that are relevant to operators that are not driven by sponsorships. One of the things that we didn't like, we partner with them, and we're so fortunate to do that. We're stoked because we're like, where do we go to get information as operators that doesn't feel like, example, if it's an article on POS systems, I don't want to see that it's sponsored by like Toast.
Right. Over and over again.
Right. I just don't want to deal with it. I want to read like legit people in the business go, here's why Toast works and here's why it sucks. Here's why Micros is great. Here's why it sucks. But give me all the information because that's so valuable to me as an operator, right down to credit card fees. And I want the truth. I want the tone of a Howard Stern article, whether it's I like Howard Stern or not. I just want to have people to bounce off of that just say it like it is, right? So that's what we're doing with them, and we're really excited. We're going to be launching it. We're really stoked. So it's going to be them and us. It'll be basically a new type of publication powered by them and Maverick Theory, and then I'll come out. Yeah, so we're really excited. It's going to be the beginning of hopefully a resource online for people.
Factual information online is hard to find. So an unbiased information is also really hard to find. So I support all of that. I think it's incredible. I'm really happy for you guys and what's up next for you. And I know that, Bar and Restaurant Expo is coming up in this spring. Will be your 1 year anniversary when it happens, right? Right around the same time?
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be in March.
I only know that because my son was born March 29th. And that's when you guys like popped up on my phone.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, it was really cool. I think we were the first consulting company to do a booth at the show. And I've been on the board there for several years. But Duffy got me on the board many years ago. And yeah, so this year was really cool. This year we became strategic partners with the Bar and Restaurant Expo. And we've been qualifying is a hard way to say it, but really just interviewing and setting up all the speaker panels in the education and helping them with that. So that's been a real privilege to do that. And it's been really cool. But yeah, so it'll be 1 year. It's kind of crazy. But it is
happening in a year.
But congrats to you. This is really cool to be part of this and part of what you're building. And I'm
super excited.
Take some risks.
Yeah, I have no fear of failing anymore because I say it can't get worse. It can't get worse. And I'm just trying to enjoy what this show is about. And that's getting to meet people like you and other guests I've had before. And my last few episodes are coming up. There's more in the works for Hospitality Bites, and there's more in the work for Tips and Maverick Theory. And I just want to thank you again. Go ahead.
I got to tell you something because your story is really, really inspiring. So when we talked and you told me a little bit about things you'd gone through in the past, it meant a lot to me because you're undoubtedly authentic and honest.
Thanks.
And, one of the cool things is that there's a Steve Jobs quote that I just absolutely live by, and it's really affected me the last year, hence the genesis of Maverick Theory. And I think this kind of journey you're on is, he said, if you wake up, the exact quote is, if you treat every day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly be right. And I love that. I love it because it reminds me of what you just said when you said, I'm not really afraid of failing at anything anymore because you really don't need to be.
That is so wild that you said that because yesterday I made this I always make dumb reels and they make me happy. And there's this guy that I follow called The Guy with Hair, and he makes these. Have you seen him before?
No.
Okay. Go look at a video that I shared yesterday. I don't know if I tagged you in it. And it was about like, if it's your last moment, like, who fucking cares? Go for it. And I made it about us recording this episode because I truly believe that, like, everything that has been thrown my way, okay, whatever, it happened, but like, I'm literally still alive, and I have got 2 great kids, a great husband, and people that support me on this journey. And I, like, one day it's not going to be here. So what am I waiting for? Like, I got to make magic happen myself. And that's literally what I'm trying to do. So that's really crazy that you said that quote to me, because that's exactly how I feel.
Well, that's
Really
cool, because I will make it my own personal mission, because this is probably the most fun I've ever had on a podcast.
Oh, thank you.
You want, and I'll tell you all the reasons offline, but it's just great. And
Thanks.
I definitely want to get other people on this podcast with you.
Oh, I appreciate that. Well, yeah, I mean, hopefully I can have you on my actual, like, show where I have, like, cameras at my beach. That's my goal. So we'll see where that comes. But thank you again. Thank you all for listening and watching. Yeah. And please remember to check out hospitalitybites.com for more information about me, my show, services, and what is next for Hospitality Bites Media. And as always, please be kind to yourself and take care. Thanks, Tips. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for tuning in today's episode. I'm Colleen Silk, the host and producer of Hospitality Bites and the founder of Hospitality Bites Media. Although this is the final season of Hospitality Bites, there's a lot more in store for HBM. I'm launching a new unscripted show called Beyond the Burnout, which will be filmed right here in my backyard of Ocean City, Maryland, and the Delaware Beaches. We'll be featuring local hospitality professionals and familiar faces, discussing everything about the industry, including its challenges, successes, and how to navigate the ever-evolving hospitality landscape. To make this happen, though, I need your support. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe to stay updated and help spread the word about Beyond the Burnout. If you want to know more about the upcoming series, industry and sponsor opportunities, please visit hospitalitybites.com or email me at csilk.hbm@gmail.com. Thank you for listening and watching, and stay tuned for more episodes and updates. Ta-da!